Hi, I'm Karen, and this is the Mental Health Hope You're Not Alone podcast. This space is all about breaking the stigma of mental health, where we'll share personal stories, helpful online resources, and meaningful insights, all with one goal in mind, to remind you that you are not alone in your mental health journey. Hello out there, hopefuls. I think I'm going to start calling y'all that as we walk through this journey of depression and anxiety. Welcome to the Mental Health Hope You're Not Alone podcast. I'm your host, Karen. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about ways to break the stigma. Today we're going to be talking about ways to cope with the depression stigma, ways to overcome the stigma of depression, individual actions that we can do to reduce the stigma, hidden and unknown reactions to depression, which I'm sure we've all been through ourselves, but those out there that may not be suffering from depression may not know. Welcome. I'm very happy that you're here. And let's get started. First, I want to say a huge shout out to somebody. I've only been doing this podcast for 2 or 3 months now, and I'm a very tiny following of 15 or 16 people, which is awesome to say the least, that you all are out there willing to listen. But I put up a video, and I'm going to link it right here, that I talked about taking a shower the other day. First time I'd taken a shower in a while, and I was thrilled with it, and I felt really good afterwards, of course. But that's one of the things that we deal with respect to depression is hygiene, and maybe not brushing our teeth as often as we should or showering as often as we should. And I posted a really small video about taking a shower and how excited I was and checking that off as a win. And somebody commented that they appreciated the video and that they needed to hear it. And that is what this whole journey is about, is reaching those people who feel that you're alone. And the whole point of this podcast is to let you know that you're not. And we're all in this together. Some days we'll have big wins like showering, where other days we may not get out of bed. So I just want to say to that person that you are very welcome. And I hope that in the future, other things here that we discuss or videos that I put out reach you or reach others that are struggling, and that we can all do this together. So anyway, let's move on to, let's talk about some hidden and unknown reactions to depression. I know that a lot of us probably have to deal with family members, co-workers, friends even, that just don't understand depression. And there's a lot of things that we, as the person that are going through, deal with on a daily basis, and nobody really understands that. So let's just talk about a few of those symptoms. So slowed metabolism was one of them, which I've always had terrible metabolism. And for me, that's not really been something that I could say that has been a problem. It is a problem, but I can't say that it's with respect to depression. Change in hormones and cortisol spikes, which, if you don't know, cortisol in general has to do with your stress. And there's also medication side effects, which I am currently going through right this very second, as I was just recently put on a new medication, an antidepressant, and it is doing all kinds of weird things to me. And I literally have slept the last 2 days away. I did not go to work. I literally slept the last 2 days away because I felt really tired. And it just did not hit well with me. But I'm still giving it a chance because it is new and it takes time for your body to regulate with new medication. But it just knocked me out. And then also, too, some other couple of things that I'm assuming it's the medication, is I've had some crazy dreams. And then also I've woken up with a headache to where it feels like almost like a hungover headache. And that was part of the reason why I slept most of the day, because I just could not get rid of the headache. And I think some of that too could also be the anxiety. I've been really dealing with my anxiety in the last, I say, week or two now. And part of my anxiety is having what I call migraines. Now, they're not diagnosed migraines, but they are a headache that I can feel right here in my forehead and affects my eyes to turn left and right. And so it can be very uncomfortable. So I call it a migraine. It's not a real diagnosis of a migraine. But anyway, so medication side effects can certainly be something that affects people when they're on medication for depression. Emotional eating, yes, that is me. I will say though, another side effect of the medication that I have been taking is I don't have an appetite. I am forcing myself to eat, which is not like me, because when I'm depressed, I tend to eat all kinds of terrible things. When I was this last weekend, my anxiety was really high and I ordered cinnamon rolls. So, not exactly a good thing. But that also goes with the emotional eating. I really am an emotional eater. I will eat my feelings and I will eat things that are just not good for me at all. And I struggle with somebody telling me at one point that's a choice, and I guess it is a choice. But I'm also trying to fill a void. And the way I do that is to have that split second of happiness with the food that I eat, tend to go towards things that are sweet. So cinnamon rolls for one. And then the very last thing here on this list is when you're dealing with depression is loss of routine and structure. And I will say that for sure. I tend to go towards sleeping when I'm really depressed. I've lost desire to do things, and I am a shell of a person that I used to be. And so it's really hard sometimes to get out of that funk and get back into some sort of routine. And I've been really struggling with that lately because I was doing really well by walking every day, and now I haven't walked for 2 or 3 days. And I really need to do that, especially because my dog wants to. But yeah, so that's one thing that's been really tough. And then other known symptoms here on this list are memory troubles, and I can absolutely tell you for sure, without a doubt, that is a problem that I have dealt with. Years ago, when I was going through a new position, and I was already struggling with anxiety and depression, and was hoping that this new position was going to be a new start for me, it really wasn't, because I was still suffering from the anxiety and depression from a previous position that I felt like I was targeted in a negative way. And so because of that, I went into this new job damaged, basically. And I was having a very hard time with just trying to do the job well and learn the job, and I just wasn't learning fast enough. And so it made it really difficult, and I failed the job. And so that's actually where a lot of my anxiety and depression comes from, is the fear of failing, the fear of not meeting somebody's expectations. Some would call it imposter syndrome, which I do believe that there's an aspect of that in there. And I did notice that when I changed jobs and I was in a position that came natural to me, and I was able to use my skill set in a different way, that my memory snapped back into a good position, let's say, to where I was able to have a really good memory. And so for sure, 100% for me, that my memory does and is affected by my depression and anxiety. And also too, factor in, I'm also dyslexic. So my ability to retain things can be pretty difficult at times. And then also too, I'm now in my 50s, which you factor in menopause, that too can affect your memory and just overall age. And so I had a lot of things that could be causing some memory issues. And so I have to be aware of that and go above and beyond with respect to how I remember things. Like by using a calendar or lists or things, notifications on my phone, things like that. Another symptom here is irritability and anger, and I can say yes. I recently snapped at a coworker, and I didn't really tell them why I was snapping, which is probably unfortunate. It's not true. I did tell one of my coworkers what had happened and I think why. It's things like that where you just never know what somebody's dealing with respect to their just anything. And for me, it's anxiety and depression, but people tend to judge you off the action and not the reason why you reacted that way. And so for me, I snapped and I shouldn't have. And I did apologize, not to the person that I snapped at. That's a long story. It's a long story why I didn't. But I did tell my coworker why I felt that way or why I snapped. So they were able to understand it a little bit better. Brain fog and forgetfulness, which also goes along with the memory troubles, physical pain. Yes, I don't have that as much more so with the anxiety than depression, but yes, it does. Anytime there's something going on, you can always say that, especially with mental and just mental illness in general, can say that physical pain could be a part of it. Oversleeping or not sleeping, yes, I tend to oversleep. Like I said, I had slept the last couple of days, and that was mainly due to the change in medication, but also too, I'm just not myself right now. So I was more than willing to sleep the last 2 days away because I just didn't want to be a part of the day. Feeling numb. I have a really good friend that we've talked about feeling numb and whether or not what we're going through is actually feeling numb to things, or is it just a different reaction to whatever it is that we're going through. And I think for me anyways, it could be a little bit of both, especially with feeling numb to things that I have continually had, I'll say had issues with, but then have been a problem many times over. It's happened several times that the more it happens, for me anyways, the better chance I have at feeling numb towards that. If that makes sense. Social withdrawal, absolutely. I have no desire to go out and do anything. It takes a lot for me to even get out of the house for work, and I don't tend to go into work very often for that reason, and I'm trying to overcome it, but it's been very hard. And feeling overwhelmed with tiny tasks, and I can tell you that's for sure. I actually just put my dishes away for the first time in a few days, which is normal for me. I tend to let my dishes sit for too long, so that's normal. But part of it was the feeling overwhelmed was cleaning the dishes before putting in the dishwasher, which is one of my least favorite chores, which I hate doing it, but that tends to overwhelm me, especially when the dishes stack up. And it didn't used to be like that. So anyway, let's move on to the next thing here. Why are these symptoms so misunderstood? And I want to read something that kind of goes along with this and the stigma with it. But it says, number one thing here says, they don't look like they have depression on the surface. And I have actually been told that. And people assume, let me just go down this list and I'll come back. So people assume that depression equals sadness, which is not true. They maybe can for some, but not for me. Weight change and irritability are often judged as a personality flaw, which is true. I'm afraid that people judge me for maybe what I said to my coworker here recently and don't really know exactly what's going on. Physical symptoms are all basically, sometimes people will say that's all in your head, and then most people don't know that depression affects the body just as much as it does the mind, which is so true. That's so freaking true. It affects every aspect of my body, my life, of course, in my mind. So let's go back to the very first one here, where it says they don't look like depression on the surface. 2.5 years ago, I was really dealing with the anxiety and depression, and I ended up taking 3 months of FMLA because I just could not handle the situation that I was in at work. It was just really overwhelming to me. And so I was really struggling. And the people that I was working with at the time did not know the history of me before me coming into that office. So they didn't know that I was already having anxiety and depression. And so to them, it felt or it looked like I had just fallen off the deep end after 6 months, which in reality, it had been happening for 2 years at that point. And actually, if you include the first part of it, like since I was diagnosed, it was more like 3 years. So this is a memorandum that I wrote. I'm going to read it to you. And I did do a short video on this, kind of leading up to today's podcast. And I'm going to change the name. So I want to read this to you. This was an interaction that I had with a coworker. And I tend to write for the record memos when I have interactions with coworkers when they're not a positive interaction, because you just never know when that interaction might come up in another case. You just never know. So it's best to write it down. And I tend to do this just in general. I tend to keep track of everything that I do during the day. And if there is some sort of interaction with a coworker that's not positive, I will write a for the record memo. So this is a memo that I wrote on June 23rd of 2023, and it has to do with interaction between two different people at my work. And I'm going to change the names, and I already said that, so I'm going to change the names. It says, on Friday, June 23rd, 2023, Sam expressed his opinion about why others in the office may not be welcoming to me upon my return from FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. And if you don't know what that is, it's a legal way for you to leave your job for 3 months while your place of employment holds your job for you. And you can take that, I think it's companies or businesses with greater than 50 people, but I work in a huge organization, so it obviously is a part of that. It can be done. But it's a legal way for you to take a leave of absence. And many women use it for maternity leave, but they can take it for any type of medical problem, whether it be with you or your family member. Okay. So the conversation started out with Sam, why Mark might be acting short with me. I have to remember my own names here that I'm going to replace. His response was that many people in the office were upset with me because it appeared that I had used all of my leave so I could go on FMLA. Sam mentioned that the optics of the situation didn't look good, but he also mentioned that he and the rest of the employees may not have a full understanding of the situation, which is true. They didn't know anything. And so it was just based on their opinion, based on what they knew and what they were seeing. Additionally, another rumor that has been going around is that I came back to the office because I couldn't find anything better. I wasn't even looking for a position during this time. I was dealing with my anxiety and depression, and I was actually trying to decide whether or not I was going to resign or maybe go start filling out paperwork for a disability retirement. And I wasn't looking really for another job. I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to leave and how I was going to do that. So, since I was also told that it appeared that I was fine, here's your stigma right here, that I was fine and basically fell off a cliff, that is why the opinion is that it didn't look good from their perspective. Within the conversation, I was compared to Mark, who on a similar level was having trouble within the office. The comparison is that no matter what, Mark will come into the office to work. I have been having issues for the last 6 months, and for the most part have been absent. Therefore, I do not have a good work ethic, which is not true. Again, this is your stigma. It's just not true. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want to go into my work detail. An additional example was given when he and someone else stayed at the office for a length of time during a winter storm when I was not there or available. And yeah, because I was on FMLA during that time, so I wasn't going to come in. Another point that was made is that I am to blame for the reason why some in the office had their vacation time denied, which I didn't know that. Prior to returning to the office, it was unknown as to whether or not I was going to be back. Therefore, I didn't know until about 3 weeks prior to the return, which is true. I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to resign or maybe retire on a disability. And it was decided that at about 3 week mark prior to me returning that I decided I was going to actually return. Because going on during that time, I needed to have a job. And so I decided to return. I went into detail as to what happened because I was told that I needed to apologize to the staff. And here's where I feel like I failed. It's really none of their business as to what was going on with me and what I was dealing with at the time. And I didn't want to discuss those details, but I felt like I had to when they're thinking that I couldn't find anything better and that I had a poor work ethic and all these other things about me. And so I felt like I had to defend myself. And I still feel like I have to defend myself. Here I am reading this memorandum that I wrote because I still feel like I have to defend myself. But I did talk to the staff member about everything that I was going through, and it's really none of their freaking business. So it's really unfortunate that this was what occurred, because it doesn't make the situation any better. When you've got somebody dealing with depression and anxiety and then they come back to a hostile work environment, which is exactly what it was, because they felt that I needed to apologize, then it didn't make anything better. And I did come back trying to be positive and just make the changes that I needed in order to not feel that way. But I quickly realized that I was really right back where I was before I even left. And that was part of the reason as to why I didn't know if I wanted to return, because I knew that the environment that I was going to go back to was going to be the exact same, which would then keep me in the same mental state as I was before. And it was absolutely awful. And the last 6 years have been the worst 6 years of my life. And minus the year that I got divorced, just 2011. So I say this because if you see somebody struggling, try to postpone your judgment until you understand what's really going on. There are things, in this case especially, there are things that they did not know. They didn't know my history before coming to this office. And they didn't know that I was already walking through the doors with anxiety and depression. And just a whole series of things happened when I was working at this office that just contributed to more anxiety and depression. And it was a very wonderful thing that I was able to get out when I did, because I think I probably would have had to resign otherwise. And I got out in early 24. So, although now that I'm dealing with it again for other various reasons, so it was good there for a while, but it's not great now. But anyway, I wanted to bring this letter up because there are probably others out there talking about you or me. Especially me, like right now. I haven't been to the office in a really long time. I've been like once or twice in the last 4 or 5 months. But I will say this, they actually have been really great and very understanding. And when I did come back for the first time after several months, they were nothing but nice. Just hugs all around and welcome backs from people. And it was just great. And makes me feel like I am a good addition to the team for the most part. Sometimes I tell myself stories that say otherwise, but nonetheless, it was a great thing to come back. And I'm trying to get the courage to go in again, but after the last couple of weeks, it's just not going to happen. Yeah, let's talk about ways to cope with the stigma. So here's some ways to deal with the stigma. So make sure you get treatment. Obviously, but for me, I actually have a counselor that I talk with, and I have a psychiatrist that I'll be talking with here at some point. Make sure that my medication is what I should be taking. And then I'm actually considering maybe finding another type of counselor, one that can help me get to the bottom and the whys about why I am dealing with what I'm dealing with versus just talking to a counselor about my anxiety. But it says, don't let the fear to keep you from getting help. And if you want to go back to the last episode of this podcast, we did talk about ways to have conversation starters with somebody who would be your counselor, just because it can be hard to go in and talk to somebody about yourself for an hour. Some people find that very uncomfortable. Really, the only way that you are going to get the help that you need is if you are open and honest and do the work, which I'm terrible at doing the work, I'll be honest. But it says the treatment can help you find out what's causing your symptoms and lessen those that are leading to difficulties in your life. Okay, so another way to cope with stigma is don't let the stigma create self-doubt or shame. And I know that can be difficult, especially when you are feeling overwhelmed with your depression and anxiety. But so let's just say, let's go on, or let's read here what it says. So you might think that your condition is a sign of personal weakness, but it's not. Get counseling and educate yourself about your condition. Connect with others who have mental health conditions like yours. This can help build your self-esteem, which is true. I recently, and I say recently, within the last several months, connected with somebody who deals with anxiety, and it made a world of difference in my mind about dealing with anxiety and depression, just because I felt so alone. And finally meeting somebody who I could relate to was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So definitely see if there's a way to find others that are dealing with depression so you can have that connection. Okay, next one on the list here is don't stay away from other people, which I'll tell you what, that is so hard, because that's one of my things that I do. I tend to self-isolate and not go out with people, and it's really hard to get the desire or courage to even leave the house. And so this says, tell trusted family, friends, and clergy or members of your community about your mental health condition. They can offer you support and understanding. Which, again, that's also something else that's really hard. I tend to not tell people that I don't know. For example, I just recently wanted to sign up to become a member of a choir that's nearby. And I'm hoping it will be a way to get out and meet people and sing, which I love to sing. And because I was in choirs when I was really young, like in high school. And you know what I want to tell the people is that I'm going to use this choir as a way to get out and try and help with my mental health. But how do you tell somebody that you don't know? And it's going to be hard, I think, initially. And I'm not sure exactly how I would explain that to somebody I don't know. But it's definitely on my mind. So if you got any ideas out there, let me know. Don't think of yourself as you're conditioned, and which is hard. Really hard, because I associate myself with my condition. Say I have bipolar condition instead, I'm bipolar, which I tend to say that I have depression. I don't say I am depressed. Join a support group. Says there's groups. This is really good, and this is something that I actually would like to do, I think. Groups such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness, called NAMI, offers programs and resources that help lessen stigma by teaching people about mental health conditions. Some state and federal programs, such as those that focus on vocational readiness in the Department of Veterans Affairs, others support for people with mental health conditions. And I love this idea, and I think I'm actually going to try, and I'll link it for you here if you want that. But I'm also going to look at this for myself and see if there's a way to connect with others that way. Get help at school, and I'm not going to school, but this is for people who are. So as a mental health condition affects learning, find out what plans and programs might help. In the United States, the law requires schools to help students with mental illness conditions. Talk to your teacher, professors, or administrators about the best approach and resources. And I actually was in school in 2023 and 24, and I was really struggling with depression during that time, to the point where it was really hard to get the desire to study. And I ended up not telling anybody, but I did tell them that I suffered with dyslexia and was hoping for some kind of accommodation, which I ended up not doing because there was a lot of hoops to jump through, and so I ended up not going that route. But this is at least something that you could think about. Get help at work. This is definitely something that I struggle with. If a mental health condition affects your work, find out what your workplace can do to help. Many workplaces can adjust your work and offer employee assistance program. Now, we do have an employee assistance program, and I have called it for help, and they are terrible. They were not at all helpful. But I do talk with others at work, and I'm very open and honest about what I'm going through with my bosses, so they are very aware of what I'm dealing with. And there is a reasonable accommodation that they can provide a person that's dealing with mental health issues. And so we have gone down that road. And then the last thing here on this list, which is really great, says speak out about stigma and share your opinions at events and online that can help others and teach the public about mental health. And I ultimately believe that is really where this is going to be good for everyone, is the more we talk about it, and hopefully people will begin to look at this podcast a little more closely or seriously, that this is a good way to help educate family and friends. If you're the one that's dealing with a mental illness and you don't want to talk to them about it, share this podcast with them and hopefully they'll listen. Because there's a lot of things that occur when you're dealing with mental health, and not everybody understands that, and not everyone wants to talk about it. So point them in the direction that they can go and learn. So the last thing here is breaking the stigma and naming what's real. And this is really important, I think. So stigma thrives on silence. So let's talk about it, which is true. We're not talking about mental health. Mental health is still very much taboo, and so people are not talking about it. And so there are things here that I think we can talk about that would help break that stigma. And so this is a list of stigma and then what the truth really is. The stigma is you're not trying hard enough. The truth of that is depression blocks energy, focus, and motivation. Trying is harder than anyone else, which is true. You're trying harder than anyone else. The stigma is you gained weight because you stopped caring. The truth is depression disrupts biology. Weight changes are a response, not a character flaw. And I can tell you from experience as a fact, I have gained so much weight because of my depression that I'm sure that there are people out there that think I am I am lazy. I feel like I am lazy because I don't do anything. But the ultimate reason is the depression, that I have a hard time getting out of bed to do things, and I've lost interest in doing things. The stigma is you don't look depressed, which is exactly what my coworkers said to me. And the truth of it is, depression is often invisible, masked by functioning and forced smiles, which is so true. I tend to, which I've talked to my counselor about, telling her that I wear a mask when I go into work. And I act funny, and I act happy, and I smile, and I'm cordial with people. And I don't know. And she actually was talking to me about maybe don't do that. But it is in my DNA, or at least it was how I was brought up, was we don't show people our emotions or the truth about what we're going through. And so for me, it was, I will not show that side of me. And it makes me very uncomfortable to think about. Now, yes, I have shown emotion in this podcast, but I'm also trying to take that mask off for this podcast and be vulnerable so others feel that they are not alone. And so it's been very hard to, going into work and putting that mask on and then coming and doing a podcast and taking that mask off, which is very uncomfortable for me. I tend to not show emotion, so it's very uncomfortable for me. But that is exactly what needs to happen. So I don't know how I would do that at work. And I think the reason I don't want to do it at work is because of the stigma. People tend to think that if you're dealing with a mental health issue, that you, like in my case, they thought I had a poor work ethic, which is not true. I was just dealing with a mental health issue. And I'm afraid that people will make that stereotype about me and And so sometimes I have to just go in and put on a mask and do the best I can. So anyway, let's move on. The next thing here is says, so the stigma is you're being dramatic or emotional. The truth of it is irritability, overwhelm, and brain fog are legitimate symptoms, which is true. When we normalize the less talked about experiences, we help listeners understand, which is very true. Nothing about these symptoms make you weak, broken, or at fault, which is true. It's really hard for me. I do feel weak because of it, but I also know that's not true. So let's talk about 9 ways to fight the mental health stigma. And I think this is going to be really good too. So this is talking about what the first portion was talking about what you can do, and now this is the way we can talk about the stigma itself. So talk about openly about mental health. Absolutely. I think the more we talk about it, the easier it is and will be understood by those who just don't understand. So underneath this, it said, or underneath the talking about openness, I fight stigma by talking about it, about what it is like to have bipolar disorder and PTSD on Facebook. Even if this helps just one person, it's worth it to me. This is from somebody who's talking about their mental health. And I tend to not be open about it on Facebook. I should be, but I tend to not be open about it because my family follows me and I don't want them to know the whole story. They know bits and pieces about it, but they don't know everything that I've been through. And so I don't want them to know that, especially my parents. And they don't even know I have this podcast. And maybe someday they will know, but they don't right now. Okay, next one here on the list is educate yourself and others. And a quote here underneath this is, I take every opportunity to educate people and share my personal stories and struggles with mental illness. It doesn't matter where I am. If I overhear a conversation or a rude remark being made about mental illness or anything regarding a similar subject, I always try to use that as a learning opportunity and gently intervene and kindly express how this makes me feel and how we need to stop this because it only adds to the stigma. And that is so true. That is so true that if you continue to not say anything, all that does is just continue to create more of a stigma or make the stigma even more believable. Be conscious of language. And so I fight stigma by reminding people that their language matters and that it's so easy to refrain from using mental health conditions as adjectives. And in my experience, most people are willing to replace their usage of it with something else if I explain why their language is problematic. And this is not something that bugs me, but I'm sure there are others out there that it does. Next one here on the list is encourage equality between physical and mental illness. That's so true. We tend to go to the doctor for our physical symptoms. And that's exactly what got me to the doctor about my anxiety, was I was having all these physical symptoms, not realizing that it was anxiety. And then later down, maybe a year or so after that, I was diagnosed with depression, which I was already dealing with depression, but I hadn't gone into the doctor's office about it. So yeah, it's really easy to go to your doctor for physical, just anything physical. They're not treated the same. People tend to understand if you stay home for a month because you have a broken leg, but they don't understand if you stay home for a month because you're having mental health issues. So again, that goes back to the talking about it more and creating more education for those who don't understand. But the quote under this here says, I find that when people understand the true facts about what mental illness is, being a disease, they think twice about making comments. I also remind them that they wouldn't make fun of someone with diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, which is very true. Show compassion with those with mental illness. The quote here says, I offer free hugs to people living outdoors and sit right there and talk with them about their lives. I do this in public and model compassion for others. Since so many of our homeless population are also struggling with mental illness, the simple act of showing affection can make their day, but also remind passersby of something so easily forgotten, that humanity of those who are suffering. And I agree with this. After I returned, and just do the comparison between the two offices, after I came back from FMLA, I was met with hostility. It was a hostile work environment. I was told that I was faking it, that I couldn't find another job elsewhere, and that the optics of it didn't look good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Compare that to my current office, who not everybody knows what's going on, but they noticed that I was gone. And then when I did come back, it was several people gave me a hug. Several people told me that they were happy to see me back. And it was just a completely different welcoming. And I appreciated that. It made me feel good. It made me feel like I was a part of the team. And if you compare those two, which office would you want to return to? You would want to return to the one where people were kind to you and understanding and offered hugs. You would not want to come back to the office where there was a hostile environment and people thought you were faking it. Let's be real. So if there is somebody in your office struggling, ask them what you can do. How can you help them? And maybe they will have a hard time discussing it with you. Who knows? But at least you're asking and you're not judging. That's a really big difference here. Next here on the list is choose empowerment over shame. So I fight stigma by choosing to live an empowered life. To me, that means owning my life and my story and refusing to allow others to dictate how I view myself and how I feel about myself, that's really good. I dig that. Be honest about treatment. I fight stigma by saying that I want to see a therapist and a psychiatrist. Why can people say that they have an appointment with their primary care doctor without fearing of being judged? But this lack of fear does not apply when it comes to mental health professionals. Very true. And let the media know when you're being stigmatized. This quote here says, if I watch a program on TV that has any negative comments, storylines, or characters with a mental illness, I write the broadcasting company and to the program itself. I would not do that, but more the power to you if you want to do that. I just don't have time for that. Nor do I really care. That's me, though. So more the power to you if that's what you want. Don't harbor self-stigma. So I fight stigma by not having stigma for myself, not hiding from this world in shame, which I tend to do that. I wouldn't say it's shame. I just don't want that conversation with family. Because we have a history, and I just don't want to bring that up. But being a productive member of society, volunteer at church, have friends, and be a peer mentor and a mom, which I'm not a mom, but can be. Others can be. I take my treatment seriously. I'm purpose-driven and want to show others they can live a meaningful life even when battling a mental illness, which is true. Which is one of the things that I'm struggling with in a very big way. So here's other ways you can help break the stigma. So stop using minimizing language. Every time someone says, just cheer up, everyone feels that way. You're overreacting. You need to be more positive. Try replacing that with, your feelings matter. I'm here with you. This sounds hard and I want to understand more. Which is so true. When I first started talking with my boss about my mental health and wanting to have a combination at work about it, her response was, everyone feels this way. To a point. It was like, everyone has to go to work. Why can't you? Was the response that I got. And I honestly think that the request that I did was just caught her off guard. Because ever since then, she's been very accommodating and very understanding and empathetic. And so I think it was just a one-off comment. The next thing here is normalize conversations about mental health. People talk about headaches, back pain. We just talked about this, but this is just another thing here. It says, people talk about headaches, back pain, and doctor visits openly, but hide anxiety and depression. Breaking the stigma means doing things like checking in on your mental health the same way that you do with your physical health, talking openly about therapy, sharing your own struggles when appropriate, and being willing to say, I'm not okay. And there's that saying that says, matter of fact, I have a sticker somewhere that says, I have a pin that says it's okay to not be okay. Because it really is. Number 3 here is believe people the first time when they tell you that they're struggling. One of the most damaging stigmas comes from doubt, which I would agree with that. You don't seem depressed, which is what I dealt with. You're always laughing. You have nothing to be anxious about. When someone says that they're struggling, believe them, even if they look fine and visible symptoms are still real. And I think in one of the episodes coming up, we're going to talk about functional depression, which is basically somebody who acts as if they are functioning in life, but they are dealing with depression. And I think it goes along with this stigma. So I think it's really important to talk about that. And the next here is educate yourself instead of judging, which I know it's really easy to judge, and the harder thing is to educate yourself, but learn about what depression is, understand that weight gain, irritability, and exhaustion are symptoms, recognize trauma responses, which I just had a trauma response. And this was at work. And I had not filled out my time and attendance. Or no, something was my time and attendance. I can't remember. But my fear is that if I make a mistake in my time and attendance, that my boss or somebody that will be dealing with my time and attendance, that they will think that I am not a good worker. And so I got an email saying that I hadn't done something that I needed to do with my time and attendance, or timesheet as we call them. And so I responded back and said that I'm sorry, I'll get it in quickly or something like that. And I accidentally hit the reply all button, which was so embarrassing. I replied all to everybody. So embarrassing. And first time in my career ever doing something that stupid. No, I think it was the second time. But anyway. And I felt like such an idiot because then somebody replied and said, don't tell them that you not make an excuse. You don't need to tell them that why you haven't gotten it in. And my email responses to why I hadn't gotten it in is a trauma response. Because in the previous position, I got in trouble for not having it done on time. First time in that office, I got in trouble for not having it done on time. And I was in shock because I had just forgotten one thing on the timesheet and I got in trouble for it. It was shocking to me. It still is shocking to me. This was like 5 years ago. And so as somebody who's been a supervisor, I would never have written somebody a letter of expectations or whatever it was called because they forgot something minor on their timesheet. Give me a fucking break. Sorry for the language. But so now I have a trauma response because I felt like I was under the microscope for something that was so minor. So minor. Anyway, I digress. Lots of emotions with that one. Stop using mental illness is insults. You're acting crazy. You're psycho. I'm OCD. OCD is something that's so overused. So freaking overused. The people think that a nice house or a neat house is OCD, and maybe it is to a point, but there is so much more to OCD than that. Anyways, people may not mean harm, but language shapes beliefs. Even small shifts can help. I'm overwhelmed instead of I'm having a mental breakdown. They're disorganized instead of they're ADHD. ADHD, in my opinion, I'm just going to say this is way overdiagnosed. I think everybody has some form of it. My armchair psychology right there. So I probably have it. I haven't been diagnosed with it, but I probably have it. Next on the list is check on people quietly. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. Just thinking about you. How's your heart feeling this week? I'm here if you need anything. And I have a really good friend that we check on each other almost daily, and it's great. We're both going through our own thing, our own journey, but we also know that we need each other, and we'll send texts or call each other just about every day, and it's really great, and I appreciate her for that. Number 7 here on the list is respect boundaries and don't rush healing. Nothing breaks stigma more than the understanding that healing isn't linear. People have good days and bad days, which is so freaking true. My feeling is very much like a roller coaster. Some days I feel like I'm doing really well. Other days I feel like I am just not getting out of bed, things like that. So it can be really tough. Resting isn't quitting, which for me, resting is about all that I want to do. And weight changes, irritability, withdrawal are symptoms, not personality flaws. That's something that I do. Encourage professional help without pressure instead of you need therapy. If you ever want support finding a therapist, I'm here to help, or you deserve tools that can support you. Gentle encouragement is respect, not stigma. Advocate publicly when you can. People can help break the stigma, sharing mental health resources on social media, speaking up when someone makes a harmful comment, normalizing mental health days, which is so true. Years ago, and I don't know if my boss is somebody who subscribes, but I'm going to talk about this anyways. Years ago, my dog passed away, and it was very traumatizing for me because I took my poor baby into the ER, and he just was not doing well, of course, and eventually got put on 100% oxygen, and I think he was having like heart failure, so his lungs were starting to fill with fluid, and so he was in like a little incubation thingy that was for 100% oxygen for him. And that following day, I was going to go down and basically just stop all care because it was time for him to pass. And unfortunately, I did not get down there in time, and he passed before I could get there. And I was really traumatized by that because up until that point, I had 2 dogs pass away, and I was with both of them when they passed. And it was done in a normal environment where you take the dog in, and you're basically, they both were sitting on my lap when they passed. And with this one, I was not there with him, and I was really upset. I'm still upset about not being there for him when he passed. And so my friend and I, after that, went down to see him, and I was just a blubbering idiot. That's probably not the right word. I was just really sad and crying, and they had him, it was so sweet. They had him in a little bed, and so I was able to go into a private room and see him, and I hooked on him for, I don't know, a while, because I really was upset that I wasn't there for him. And so the next like 24 hours were really hard, and I had a presentation to go to the next day, and was hoping that my boss would allow me to just come in to do the presentation and then not have to work the rest of my time that day. And she ended up saying no. And I at one point, not for this case, but when I was going through my divorce, and I think I missed 2 weeks after my divorce went through because I was so upset. And I had to remind this same boss that mental health is also something that we can use our sick leave for. And she was not keen on that idea. She didn't like the idea. And I think I even had to show her where it said mental health was something that we could use our sick leave for. So if you're a supervisor out there and your employee is going through something, remember that they're human, and have empathy and understanding that the more you can be understanding of their situation, the easier it makes it for them. And I say that because this person is already going through something traumatizing. So for me, it was losing a dog and going through a divorce, and then having my boss question taking off work for that. Wouldn't you want your employee to be at their best when they're at work and working for you? And when you're having troubles because you're upset about going through a divorce or maybe losing your dog, that person is not going to be at their best. Their mind is going to be somewhere else. They're going to be distracted. They are not going to be at their best when they are working for you. So why not give them the time that they need to deal with whatever it is they're dealing with? Give them time to mourn and be upset and work through the emotions that they have when they're going through that. And so I cannot say this enough to supervisors. People that work for you are human. And people that are human have emotions. And the better you are as a supervisor with those emotions is really important. it could make you or break you with respect to how you are seen as a supervisor. No trait. Okay, so last thing out here is hold space without trying to fix. This is huge, huge. You don't need advice. You don't need solutions. You just need somebody to be present. And I agree. I have a friend. I love her to death. She is wonderful, but sometimes when I talk to her, she tends to give me a lot of advice. And I don't want to hear the advice, but I don't also have the balls to tell her to shut up. And I don't even know if she'll listen to this. She probably won't. But I just want somebody to listen. I just want somebody to listen. If I have a big complaint and I want to vent, just shut up and listen. It's really hard. I know some people, especially men, it's really hard to not give advice, but just hush. Just listen. Be present. It says, when others say that I don't know exactly what you are feeling, but I'm not leaving. That's so helpful and very nice. Okay, so we're moving on here. We're all just about done. To wrap it up here is to say that whatever depression looks like for you, whether it's weight gain, being exhausted, sleeping all day, being irritable, feeling numb, that your experience is real and that you're not alone. That we're all here to experience this together and share ideas and share ways to get better. And one of those ways is through trying to break the stigma. So you're not broken, you're not failing. Just know that let's do this together and break the stigma. So educate your family and friends. Talk about your mental illness or mental health and let others know what's going on in your life. That can be really important to others with respect to people that you work with, which is my case. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me, the Mental Health Hope, You're Not Alone podcast. And I'm your host, Karen. If today's episode of Real Stories, Real Struggles, and Real Hope resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps others find this space and feel less alone.